Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you this evening. Uh, that I remember when those of you attended that Soil Health Academy and talked a little bit about a coalition there and starting a coalition in North Carolina. And it's really exciting to see these coalitions come to be because I think they're really farmer driven and farmer centric and really help move the needle on soil health in their individual states and beyond, and the networking that goes on can't be beat. So I just put a few slides together this evening. In talking with Ben, I really was hoping that it would be more of a conversation and would have the opportunity to just talk about soil health and ecosystem function and anything else you want to ask me. Nothing's off the table. So with that, I start out with this slide, the power of sunlight. I've been in this a long, long time, and no matter where I travel all over the world, and I tend to get around a little bit, I'm trying not to travel much anymore, but it doesn't matter what state I'm in, what continent I'm on. I really think farmers underestimate the power of sunlight. Sunlight being intercepted by the plant, by leaf tissue from a living plant, truly can generate new wealth. And I spend a lot of my time now talking to board of directors, CEOs, corporate, big business, and talk a lot about financing and about generating wealth. And I always try and impose on them that true new wealth, if they're going to talk about having new wealth, that has to come primarily from our ecosystem and especially from sunlight, because it's that sunlight that gives us all the ability to really regenerate our landscapes and to generate new wealth. I put this picture in here, and I know you don't have anything like this in North Carolina, but excuse me, I wanted to start by making a point. The point is the power of that sunlight. And I was out on this very large ranch in New Mexico, and I'm with the ranch manager and a bunch of ranch hands, and we were out in one of the paddocks, this one here, and they were telling me, well, you don't understand, how poor our soils are. And so I had them take a shovel and dig some of the soil between those plants. And then I had them take the shovel and dig next to a plant. And you'll see there in this photo, there's unfortunately a shadow there to the left is blocking where that hole was dug, but those holes are only about 3, 4 feet apart. Yet look at the difference in the color of that soil. And I moved the clod of soil from next to the grass plant over to where the bare soil was. But look at the difference in that soil there. And, so my point to him was I said, so you're telling me that I just happened to pick the one spot in this pasture where the soil type changed? Well, that just shut him up totally. Now we could have a conversation. And then I could start educating that team as to the power of a living plant and living roots and sunlight and photosynthesis and biology. And so I really wanted, and this is nothing none of you don't realize, but I just wanted to start the conversation this evening as to the importance of that and get you thinking of how you can collect more sunlight on your farm and create new wealth. Now, you may have seen this photo before. I tend to show it some, but there's two soils, clods there. taken literally feet apart. Okay? They're the same soil type, a Williams loam soil. Now, ironically, both of these are from no-till cropland fields. The one has been no-tilled at the time that this photo was taken. The one had been no-tilled about 30 years. The other one approximately 18 years. So 18 years is still a long time. You know, you can make significant advancements to the ecological health of that soil in 18 years' time. But obviously, there's still a very big difference. And I contend that that difference lies primarily in management. And it's the management that makes the difference. And here's what it starts with, as you all are well aware. It's plants collecting that solar energy, photosynthesizing, and look at the dreadlocks on those roots. Look at that rhizosheath and that interaction between biology then and the root of that plant. And that's where the magic happens. And, you know, I spend a lot of time at conferences and speaking at different events, and I am in no way making this statement to belittle any of the work that's being done to advance uh, the use of biologics or inputs of any kind. In saying that, though, they all pale in comparison to what nature can do. Here's a photo that I really like showing the power of biology. And the caption there, mycorrhizal fungi and biology build well aggregated soils, pore spaces, advance and improve the water cycle, improve the nutrient cycle. And I'm talking about the natural nutrient cycle. I'm talking about biology. And we've really, in agriculture, have tended to ignore that for the most part. Now, I know there's some producers there in North Carolina who are doing a really good job of cutting back on their synthetic nutrient needs and really enhancing that natural nutrient cycle. And when you do all that, you build resiliency into your operation and you have the ability to significantly increase profitability. You know, today I don't have to tell anyone who follows markets what the commodity markets have been doing the past couple of years, and it absolutely amazes me. I was looking back at prices 10, 20, 30, and 40 years ago. You know, there's really not a lot of difference between today and what the prices were back then. They're slightly higher today, but not that much higher. But yet, look at input costs, obviously, and the cost of equipment and everything. I don't have to tell anyone on this call about that. But that doesn't mean we can't still be profitable today, you know, but the profitability is going to come about because of our ability to take advantage of these natural cycles, the ecosystem processes. My question here is, do we need more fertility? So I don't know if you notice in that picture, there's a critter standing in there. That's actually a 1,200-pound grass-finished heifer. Okay. Now, understand this might be normal for North Carolina, but this photo was taken. That is actually the second crop on that cropland in that growing season here in North Dakota. And that sorghum Sudan cover crop there had received less than 2 inches of rainfall on it. Now, since it was seeded, okay, yes, obviously there was rainfall prior to that. The previous crop on there was a fall seeded biennial winter triticale, forage winter wheat, hairy vetch. And that was harvested off immediately the next day. That diverse polyculture cover crop was seeded. And from the day of seeding until this photo was taken, there's about 2 inches of rainfall on it. Zero nutrients of any kind, except what drops out of the back end of those animals, have been applied on that field in over 18 years. And there's been cash crops and cover crops seeded in that field all of those 18 years. So my question to you is how much more fertility, would I need to apply on those fields? It doesn't look to me like that crop is suffering whatsoever. It's obviously not lacking for nutrients. Now, do I always get production like that here in North Dakota? No. That was just a very good year for growing those covers. But the fact of the matter is, I can be very profitable even at today's prices if I was to sell in the commodity market, and I don't sell anything on the commodity market, but we could be simply because our cost of production is so low because we focus on the natural cycles. I wanted to put this slide in here because to me this was just like mind blowing and hard to even fathom. This is not off my farm. It actually took place in southern Canada. It was a producer up there. It was down the regenerative path, really doing some good things. This is on cropland. And in the spring of the year, he seeded this field to a polyculture cover crop consisting primarily of oats and peas, a bit of clover in there, a bit of brassica in there. And he wanted to see if it made a difference to his soils, if he could see a difference. Uh, if he moved the animals, and it was beef cattle he had on here, he was moving them on part of the field multiple moves per day, primarily twice. And then on the other half of the field, he moved them once every 2 days. And this was near the end of the growing season after he had grazed. You're looking at some regrowth that was coming back. But look at that. That's one growing season. And so often we hear people say, oh, I don't have time to move my animals. Okay, what's the soil? What's the biology telling you in this photo? To me, that just blew my mind. And I had the opportunity to visit with this producer, and I know this to be a fact because one of our consultants is a close friend, and it was well tied into this project they were doing to determine this and documenting it. But just look at that. I mean, it's obvious which of those has more carbon, which has better aggregation, which has more biology, which is going to be deeper rooted, which is going to provide more resilience. I mean, the question shouldn't be whether we have time to do it. The question should be, can we afford not to do it, right? I mean, that's just pretty profound right there, that photo. So we use biology to unlock your nutrient vault. There's decades, even centuries worth of nutrients locked up in that soil vault. One of the things I hope you're all doing at least once on your fields is doing a total nutrient digestion test to see just how much nutrients you really have available in your soils. And I can tell you, we've taken soil tests now on millions of acres all across North America, and we have yet to find any field or pasture that doesn't have adequate nutrients for profitable production. Not one. We haven't found any. And yet, what are we told over and over? Oh, you need to apply more of this, more of this, more of this. I think farmers, by and large, have to be the most gullible people out there to just believe blindly that that's the way it should be. You know, the caption here then reads, Your deposits are earning negative interest. In other words, through erosion and nutrient loss, we're losing those nutrients. We need to be planting covers and have the biology to keep those cycling. And we have to have that biology to make them available to the plants. And it's exciting to see so many starting to work on that now and realize that. Only biology knows the combination to the vault. You know, the hubris of mankind thinking that we know truly how all these things function. No, we don't. No, we don't. Just last week, I spent several hours in a meeting with a company that they claim that they have the ability now to, once they take soil tests, they have the ability to know exactly what's needed and they can apply it and reach maximum potential on any given field. And I just left that meeting shaking my head. The hubris of mankind to think we know better, that's just so wrong. Your farm is a reflection of you. And I really believe this. The photos I showed you earlier just prove the only difference between my farm and my neighbors is the management. The soils are the same, at least they were, the basic inherent soil properties. But the management is what the difference is. I can't tell you how many times I speak to a group and they say, but Gabe, you don't understand. You don't understand. My soils aren't like that. And I tell them all the same thing. When you go home tonight, walk in the bathroom, look in the mirror, there's your problem. That's your problem right there. Your soils and your farm is a direct reflection of you. Regenerative agriculture is a thinking person's game. You have to be able to think and observe and then adapt accordingly. And we have to be willing to work with nature instead of against her. You need to get your mindset right. I just love this comic. Uh, I've made some pretty arrogant statements as I've been out speaking that you can put me on any farm anywhere and I'll be able to take and create soil there and advance ecosystem function. And so a lot of people have told me, Gabe, you're full of it, can't do it everywhere. Everywhere there's agriculture can certainly do it. Now, obviously, not the Arctic or the Antarctic, if it's ice caps, but if there's living plants, we can do it. It all just takes the right mindset. One of the things that I get a bit frustrated with is the people who they don't, they just are believing that they cannot do it on their place. So I took a photo here of this. It's a guide to on-farm demonstration research. And it's a really good booklet that's put together and shows how to do research on your own farm. At Understanding Ag, when we get new clients, first thing we do is listen, find out their contacts. But then if they're crop farmers, and even if they're livestock, we're going to ask them to do a trial on their own farm. Take a field, split it in half. We're going to take soil tests on the entire field. We're going to find out how much total nutrients is there. Do a PLFA and a Haney test. Find out what kind of biology you have. And then we're going to tell them, okay, you're going to use your standard management practices on half the field. And then the other half, we're going to apply fertility and use management to go down the regenerative path. And when they see it with their own eyes, and we have them keep exact costs so they know true cost of production and the profitability, when they see it with their own eyes, see the difference in the aggregation, in the soil armor, in the life in the soil, see the difference in profitability, and I could care less about yield. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we give awards for yield contest winners. We ought to give awards for profitability, you know, without sacrificing ecosystem function, because that's the holy grail. You know, I'll never forget years ago, there was an award-winning um, corn yield producer that came and spoke in Bismarck. And I don't even remember exactly what the yield was at that time. And at that time, I know corn was selling for just barely over $3 a bushel. And he was bragging about his corn yields. And when he got all done, of course, there was a long line for questions. And of course, Gabe, being the smart aleck that I am, I got up and I asked him the question, how much per bushel did it cost you to produce a bushel of corn in that crop that you won this yield contest on? And he said, just over $7. And I said, I have no interest in learning how to lose money. And the place erupted laughing, and I turned around and walked out. Don't give me that about yields. Talk to me about profit. Okay. If we're able to create and to garner a decent profit while advancing ecosystem function, then we've got something to brag about. So we really encourage people, use your own farm as a demonstration. Do research, and it doesn't have to be large. You can take one of your smallest fields, but make it meaningful, do it correctly, learn how to do it right, and then you're going to find out, okay, is this for me or isn't it? Here's the great reason to move to regenerative stewardship. It's profit. Yes, we all want to do what's right for the ecosystem, the environment, etc. But we got to be able to make a living at it. And one thing I can say is those who are truly focused on going down this path and doing it in a way that works with nature, not against her, they're going to make more profit. Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who many of you know, has really done a good job of recording this. Right now, we have records now on well over 1,800 farms that have gone through Understanding Ag down this regenerative path. And the profitability that they're garnering is extremely positive as compared to the conventional model. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up and open it up for questions. I'm open to anything. So Ben, I'll turn it back to you. And I don't know if you're going to ask them or just have people jump in.
Yeah, we'll have people jump in 1 second. Let me see if I can share a photo, the one that I shared with you earlier today, Gabe, just so we
Sure.
get some. Oh, let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, of course, my computer's not wanting to cooperate. Here we go. Um, so hopefully everybody can see this, but this is from Zeb Winslow's cover crop field in Halifax County last week. And I don't know if Zeb's on the call or not, but I was out there to take some soil samples for our rainfall simulator that we had at the commodities conference. And Zeb told me I could grab a sample from his cover crop field and then from his neighbor's non-cover crop field right across the road. Both of those are no-till, pretty typical row crop fields for Halifax County. Um, and it's the exact same thing that Gabe showed us, but this is North Carolina soil from a county a lot of people are probably familiar with. But you can see the no-till field without cover crops came out as essentially compacted bricks, and then Zeb's field with cover crops is well aggregated, all kinds of root mass, and the best soil test is sticking a shovel in the ground to try to dig the rainfall simulator samples because digging it in this field with no cover crops was much, much more difficult than getting it out of Zeb's cover crop field. So I know a lot of us have seen that and understand that, but it still just amazes me every time to stick a shovel in the ground and two fields right across the road from one another and have that kind of difference. It just amazes me every time. So,
Yeah, leave that up a second if you may, Ben. I want to ask everyone, so what are the reasons why one is compacted and one's not? There's multiple reasons, so there's no right or wrong answer here, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Anybody? Don't make me call on you. So,
The root growth on the no-till has, it penetrates the soil and maybe would reduce compaction, in my opinion.
yeah, and you're right. They're both no-till. Now, obviously, the one has covers, so it'll have more roots, and you're correct. That's part of it. What else? John, don't make me call on you here. I know many of you on this call, and I'm not afraid to call on you. So,
Well, I was gonna say rainfall on bare soil, which I guess to your point, they are both no-till. But I would imagine just looking at the picture that there's a little less vegetation to, I guess shield the soil from rainfall
yeah.
in the case of the
And
uh,
rainfall
conventional
pounding
no-till.
on that soil surface it definitely caused compaction on the top, and that the soil is going to react accordingly. It's going to start forming a crust, which will repel some of that. But I'll just to spur the conversation along. What I believe is the biggest reason for that compaction difference. It's a lack of carbon. You see, without the cover crop growing on there, the neighboring field is carbon deficient. Zeb's has carbon. And I don't know, and I haven't asked Ben this, and I don't know if Ben knows, but I'd be willing to bet the compacted field, that operator has a higher nitrogen use there. So anytime you're using more nitrogen, soil is 11 parts carbon to every part of nitrogen. So, when you put synthetics or any other form, it can be in the form of liquid manure. Anytime you're adding nitrogen, that soil has to balance. The biology is starved for carbon. The biology will consume that nitrogen readily, but then it'll go looking for carbon. And so, where does it find that carbon? It finds it eats any dying, decaying plant material, it eats the residue on top. Then it starts to eat the carbon material that holds those soil aggregates together. That's why so often you go into fields that are 2 years, soybeans on soybeans, they're often very compacted. And the reason is there's too much nitrogen in the system, not enough carbon, and it compacts the soil. That's what we're seeing. And so I would contend that a big part of what you're seeing there is also due to over application of nitrogen compared to the amount of carbon that's in the system. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
yeah, Gabe, I don't know um, what Zeb's neighbor is doing, but I do know that Zeb has done a lot of research on his own farm about cutting back P and K and nitrogen and seeing how far back he can cut those. So I
Mhm.
would be willing to bet that Zeb's putting less of that on his fields and probably has been for quite a while. I
Yeah.
think the other advantage we have in North Carolina is that you can keep some active plant growth throughout the year. And like you talked about at the beginning, that's capturing that sunlight and pumping that carbon into the soil to feed the soil microbes, and they're not feeding on the carbon reserves in the soil, and they're also continuing to make the compounds that create soil aggregation to begin with. So there's just a massive benefit to having those green growing plants with roots in the ground.
And before we started the webinar this evening, Ben and I were discussing, and a few others were discussing. They were asking me how much snow was up here in North Dakota, and up until this past week, we were pretty open and bare. And even though the temperature is cold, I still have green photosynthesizing plants in January. And they're taking carbon, pumping it into the soil, balancing that carbon to nitrogen ratio in the soil. That's a big part of the reason Zeb's soils are more well aggregated, and you're feeding soil biology, etc. It's a win-win-win situation. Other questions? Adam, don't make it hard. If you're going to ask me a question, don't make it hard.
Gabe, I got a question about nutrient density.
Yep.
So I've got, I farmed for 36 years. I've done a lot of cover cropping, and now I'm in the seed business. And we help a lot of our customers, with cover crops, trying to explain everything we're talking about. Sometimes it's real hard to sell. But I do have 2 or 3 guys that have fundamentally changed the way they farm. A couple of them using absolutely no synthetic P or K, still using some nitrogen, but have cut back dramatically. So certainly with their soil biology ramped up like they are, they're producing a very nutrient dense crop, right? I mean, that's my understanding, is that your soil biology is really what contributes to a nutrient dense crop. It's not necessarily no-till. It's not necessarily cover crops. It's that whole system you talked about. Mm-hmm. That being said, how do you get livestock producers or whomever to recognize that and put more value? Is there any? Are you aware of any studies that have used, say, a nutrient corn grown under a healthy system, technically more nutrient dense, right, versus the normal, quote unquote, and is there more value in one versus the other, and how do you quantify that? Is any work being done on that?
Yeah, Ab's a great question, and you're right that the more diverse the biology in the system, the more the more in quantity and the more in the array of phytonutrients there will be in the particular crop you're growing. And then if you're grazing those crops or cover crops with livestock, it'll also transfer into the protein, milk, eggs, whatever you're producing. Now, the best way for a person to take advantage of that would be to do some testing, protein content, amino acids, etc. And then it depends what species of livestock you're going to feed with that. If it's going into livestock feed, I know of many people who test the corn they're producing for even protein. And it's not uncommon for a lot of conventionally grown corn to only test 4, 5, 6% crude protein. Whereas in a more regenerative system, I've seen it test as high as 12% crude protein. That's a huge difference when they're feeding hogs, etc., poultry, it doesn't matter, and you're buying protein supplement, right? So the person that has that high testing corn can certainly increase the value going that way, if they're selling it into that type of market. Now, if you're selling into any human food grade production, there you're going to need a little more testing from a food grade lab. And a lot of universities, if there is a human health component to that university, oftentimes their labs will be able to do some of that testing. And like on the pastured proteins that my son sells, we test all those for omega-3s, CLAs, etc. And it's a huge selling point. There's a real facet of society out there now who is putting a focus on their own health, and they're willing to pay for it. and why not? Food is medicine, right? We're seeing that. And we're seeing more and more consumers willing to pay for that preventative medicine. So it's going to take some legwork on the part of the producer, but it can certainly be done. The work by Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, or Dan Kittredge's name was mentioned earlier. They're doing some really good work quantifying this.
Well, I guess Dan's work, North Carolina Soil Coalition has done such a good job of promoting soil health, getting good speakers, getting good programs to really help guys. They've just done a phenomenal. Every time I go to a meeting, I told Ben I don't know what they're paying him, but it's not enough. And he said, "Well, they're going to double my salary to zero." But anyway, Dan's point was the more nutrient dense anything is, the less you have to eat of it because your body, whatever it is. So my thought is if you could prove that a crop you're producing is more nutrient dense, technically in my mind, why wouldn't someone producing livestock or chickens or whatever it is, look at that as a cost savings from less feed, less supplements, less hauling feed, just a whole mantra of savings, especially corporations. They love touting regenerative, whether they're doing anything with it or not. I used to
you're exactly right.
Yeah, I used to get paid 50 cents a bushel for planting cover crops, but they mixed everything I did right in with everything else.
Yeah.
Because it was a PR. That's what it was about.
Well, and unfortunately, that's the way it is with the current production model. The corn we produce, the wheat, the beans, whatever it may be, just gets mixed together. So that's one of the big challenges now is segregation because the model has become so large, these large agribusinesses that aggregate supply, they don't want to segregate. But you're absolutely right. There's money to be made there, and I will guarantee you it would prove out. And it would, there's obviously a premium to be garnered to sell these nutrient dense products, commodities.
Carl, I'm gonna send your number to Gabe. I can't remember if you two met or not, but I know me and you have some pretty good conversations. Carl, if you and Gabe got to talking, it would probably go for 3 or 4 hours. So I
That
can't
would be
imagine
good.
I can't imagine a conversation between the two of you. It would be good. Adam, did you have a question before Carl asked his?
I was commenting to Gabe. Thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Somebody's got to have a question.
Sure, I've got one. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Thanks. Good to see you again, Gabe. Thanks for
Nice
being
to
here
see
for
you,
tonight.
Karen.
You've definitely spurred us to keep the torch going for the Soil Health Coalition. I've actually got two questions. The first one is, we have bale grazed and had a high stock dense rate on one of our pastures. And of course, here in North Carolina, we're blessed with a lot of rainfall. Well, the result has been broom sage. What is the imbalance and what are the steps to replace the broom sage?
Yeah, and obviously, chances are there's a bit of compaction issue there, from the wet environment. The beautiful thing is it's probably pretty shallow. Have you stuck a spade in the ground to see how deep that compaction layer, where it's at?
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
But how far down does it go?
That's a good question. I need to take a
Yeah.
man with me.
Yeah. Typically, Karen, what'll happen is in time, what I would do where there is all that broom sedge is there, it's trying to correct that. And chances are good that in time it'll self-correct. Now, what can you do in the meantime is don't graze that particular area where that is in a very wet rainfall event. And you don't want to compound the problem, so to speak. Yeah. one of the things when you're grazing, just you really need to focus on what you want, not what you don't want. Too many grazers, and I made this mistake many times. I would see something I didn't like, and then I would focus my efforts. Oh, how do I get rid of that particular species, change that? No, let succession and the natural ecosystem process take place. Nature will self-correct. Nature is always self-organizing, self-regulating, self-healing. It will take care of that. Our problem is we want the future yesterday, you know, and nature, you know, in nature, 100 years is a blink of an eye, you know, so we expect things too quickly. Yeah. Don't sweat the petty stuff like that. Don't worry about
Okay.
it. Yeah.
So there's not an imbalance or a shortage of calcium?
Yeah, I would be amazed if there was. I'm
Okay.
one I've learned never say never, but boy, chances are very slim. Chances
Okay.
are it's from the compaction event.
Great. Okay,
Hmm.
second question. Here in southeastern North Carolina, we are creating a market for the nutrient-dense products that our customers are demanding. And what are the top three drivers that create that more nutrient-dense product, or as Dan likes to call it, the bionutrients in those
Hmm.
products? Because as I've just recently learned from John Kemp, it's not organic matter. So that
Yeah.
really gives me wipes the sweat off the brow to know that
Hmm.
when we've already got low organic matter, that we can still produce or nutrient dense products.
Yeah. According to what Dr. Van Vliet tells me, the number one driver is diversity. It's diversity of plant species above ground. That equates to diversity of root types, rooting depths, and the exudates, you know, that those different plants put out are different, will cycle more nutrients, different nutrients, make those, then that'll attract the biology to make those different nutrients available. That gets flown through the plant through the natural nutrient cycle via biology and mycorrhizal fungi. That is the number one thing you should be concerned with. And it only makes sense, you know, oftentimes, especially as I head down south, southeast, a lot of the pastures, there's not as much diversity as there should be. You know, now I don't think there's a magic number, but so often we see in these areas where they took cropland fields and seeded them back to a quote unquote new improved forage species. Yeah, and then some of those are just, unfortunately, they're very opportunistic and they really are high nitrogen users and they're tough to, a bit more difficult to get the diversity established then. But that's another reason that, you know, I wouldn't sweat the broom sedge. That's just diversity in my book, you know? Yeah.
You
So I know
always,
you asked for three of them, but Karen, I'd really just focus on the diversity part of it because diversity above ground is going to lead to diverse biology. Diversity above ground, you're going to have different leaf sizes, shapes. You're going to capture more photosynthesis. That's going to drive the system.
well, you always did say change the way you look at things.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you, Gabe.
You're welcome. Nice seeing you again, Karen.
You too.
You know, this is R.C. Hunt. I've got one comment to Karen on the broom sage. With me being in North Carolina, and you say you're in South Carolina. I have always heard it's a major difference in when we get a 40-inch rain for the annual rainfall versus a 65 or 70-inch rainfall. And because of our geographical location, the acidity and the acid rain, basically, I have always heard that on the high rainfall years, uh, we've got to have a better distribution of the lime and the lime particles. And the broom sage has some direct relationship to pH.
That's interesting. The only thing I would add to that, plants have the ability to adjust pH along the rhizosheath. Along the in that rhizosphere, plants have the ability to adjust pH to make it conducive to biology. Now, I'm sure, RC, if it's way out of whack, no doubt, that'll have some effect. That's really interesting. But I'd be hard pressed to go add a lot of lime.
I'd like to add that one of my growers, customers, before they started doing cover crop, they were putting a ton of lime every other year to maintain their pH. We always go down, and especially when you plant a high nitrogen crop, it would go down, put a ton of lime, get it back up, plant soybeans, you'd be okay. Since he's implemented cover crop, and I don't mean dabbling, I'm talking about he treats it as one of his cash crops. He gets it planted on time. We're using a really good diversified mix. He's reduced his lime needs by probably 97% of what he used to do. And he's been doing this for almost 10 years. He's basically applying no lime. And every once in a while, he'll have some fields, he'll have something he needs to do something to, but it is very far and few between. So I used to be of the same mindset, Gabe, about, well, yeah, it might work out there, but it doesn't work here. It works here. The same basic principles. And again, I've seen him and another customer. Again, they have jumped on this train. And I think another important thing is when you do covers, you don't keep doing everything you've always done. You need to make some changes. You need to quit throwing a bunch of synthetic stuff out there. You need to quit putting pyrethroids just because you've always done it. That was another thing that I did. But again, they've reduced their lime. A couple of guys I deal with literally almost entirely, but not completely, but dramatically, well over 95% of what they used to do. So that is absolutely true.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. And, I know many of you know Buzz Clute there. Buzz Clute did some really good study and research out at farm scale. And what they found is that pH corrected over time once you add covers.
A lot of that research, Gabe, was done on our farm as well as my neighbor's farm that I'm talking about. Buzz helped us dramatically understand some of the science behind what was going on.
Yeah, that's great.
Down that journey.
Well, thank you for that research.
Yes, sir.
That's great. Adam, I think you had your hand up next.
I was going to offer to give you a little supporting evidence relative to the area here. Most everybody on here knows that I've been a industrious student of Gabe Brown and Dr. Williams for probably a little over 10 years, or about 10 years anyway. And when I first met these guys, I was highly addicted to every synthetic that every dealer could sell me. And very industrious about keeping my pHs in check. And, at the time I first met these guys, I was on 1,000 acres. I was consuming 250 tons of lime annually, like clockwork. You could budget it 5 years out if you wanted to. We started making the changes, going through the transitions, and that came down and came down and came down. To date, it's been 3 years since I put out any lime. Prior to that, it was 4 years before I put out any, and I went from consuming 250 tons annually to 117 tons in 4 years. They were all areas, problem areas in the field. I knew what they were. They were a water holding spot or a clay hill or something. There was an identifying factor. And I have pHs now getting into sevens. I've got rising pHs with no intervention.
Amazing. Although you're aging me, Adam, because if I've known you that long, my goodness. Time
Well,
flies when we're having fun. Yep. Dylan.
All right. Um, cool. Yeah. Thanks for doing this, Gabe. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, I wanted to ask, what recommendations do you give for low organic matter fields? So, and I guess for context, I'm trying to do row crops. So I don't have any livestock. And I'm dealing with about, 0.5% organic matter in most of these areas.
Mhm.
And I can see, cover crops, regenerative management, all these things make sense to me. Um, but maybe if I were to think about that method versus I could also import organic matter in terms of compost, I could import hay, I could do some things like that. So um, maybe the specific questions would be, say, with just the management, no importing organic matter. In your experience, how quickly do you see that start to come up? And then maybe at what points do people start to really see differences due to that improved organic matter? I think, I think we're pretty
Yeah.
clear that the organic matter is good to have, but, how much and how much of an impact, will
Mhm.
that have?
Yeah, very good questions. And, to really give you I need to ask you a lot more questions
Sure.
I really hate to give shotgun advice without knowing a lot more. But I would just say this. The number one thing by far that you can do is plant a diverse cover crop mix. And when I say diverse, I don't mean 15, 20 species. No, it doesn't have to be that diverse. What I'm concerned about is getting enough diversity in there that look at the work by Tillman done at the University of Minnesota that showed about 7 species is where you get the biggest bang for the buck, but it has more to do with the type you're going to want, primarily grasses and forbs. Stay away from a lot of legumes and brassicas. The legumes are just going to add a bit too much. I'm not saying totally away, but make sure you have a higher percentage of grasses and forbs in there. Collect as much sunlight as possible because that's going to start feeding biology, building soil aggregates, and that'll make the biggest difference. How quickly will you see the change? In one growing season, we see a lot of change
Hmm.
both ways, either positive or negative. Okay. Now, if you were going to tell me you're going to plant a cover crop entirely made up of brassicas, you're going to see a negative change because they're non-mycorrhizal and you're going to burn through. Same with legumes, you're going to burn through your what little armor you have, right? So you got to be careful about this. You got to think about what you're doing. If you want to email me at gabe@understandingag.com, I would be happy to have an email volley with you and just tell me more about what your cash crops are, what your growing season is, and I'll see if I can help you with something. But there's a lot
Awesome.
of
Thank
things
you.
to take into account there.
Yeah.
But hands down, a diverse cover will do more good. And when you're importing things, there's always a bit of catches to that. You're bringing hay onto a cropland field. What seed is in that hay? Are
Hmm.
you going to have to, adjust a herbicide program? Are you organic or not? All things to take into account. Manure, I mean, I'm just I like manure, but I really prefer the kind that drops out of an animal. Now, you're not able to do that. So then you got to pay attention to what kind of manure. Is it a bedding pack or is it from a slurry? Some of these slurries, the manure can build up penicillins and actually be negative towards soil health. So there's a lot of things to take into account there, Dylan. Good
Cool.
question, though.
Thank you.
Joseph, you're next. Joseph,
Gabe.
there we go.
Yeah, Gabe. Hey, thanks. Sorry about that. Couldn't find the mute button.
That's all right.
Hey, so I read your book and it changed my life, man. A few years ago, saved up and finally bought some land, and I'm ready to put some cows on it and cattle on it. And it's interesting seeing a lot of names on this call. I've spoken with a lot of you, April, Pasquale, like appreciate all your help. But Gabe, my question was, and I think you might have just answered it, like I was planning on getting cattle out there in the spring. Was there anything that you would recommend that I do ahead of that, aside from like maybe the diverse cover crops, just to really prep the ground for it? It's a heavy clay. There is quite a bit of compaction on the soil.
Yeah, and the question I would ask you, is that going to be a cash crop on that field, or are you going to just graze a diverse cover this year?
Uh, yeah, probably just graze a diverse cover is what I was thinking.
And then the question becomes, I need to know a bit more about what type of livestock you're putting on. Are you going to be able to move them appropriately? Because we don't want to get into the situation that Karen talked about with adding compaction in the rainfall events, especially if it's a heavy clay soil. There's some things like that you need to consider. You also need to consider, depending on the class and variety of, the class of the animals and the species, do you have the right cover crop mix that will both help address your resource concern ecologically on that field, but also that it will balance the nutrient needs of the animals, you know? As far as you don't want it to have issues with bloat or anything, or so you need to pay some attention to that. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome, Gabe. Appreciate it. And hey, appreciate you also being open with your faith in your book. I think it's really good stuff. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and on a side note of that, there was a lot more of faith that was going to be in my book, but then the editor and publisher, we had to have a little come to Jesus talk ourselves about that because they wanted me to eliminate what I put in there, and I just refused. But anyway, Carl, you're next.
Can't offend anybody, right?
Yeah.
So probably to answer this would take more than the time on the call, but so I'm converting generations old row crop farmland to pasture for cattle. That's the goal, that's the plan. It had always been a cotton, corn, peanuts, soybeans rotation. The last summer was sunflowers. I did something completely different with a different farmer just to mix it up one time before I took it over for pasture. This fall, late fall, I planted a diverse cover crop. So really, one of my next steps is planning on contacting you guys to help me out with a little bit of a roadmap. But if you had one thing to recommend, and obviously it's a lot of unknowns, but after this cover crop, through the winter, obviously I'd like to get cows on it, daily moves. I'm already practicing that with a small number that I've got on older pasture land that had horses on it. We've converted that over. So getting that part, figured out, getting fencing in place. What would you have me do this winter, early spring to speed this process along or help?
Yeah. What we have found is when you're converting cropland back to perennials, one of the most important things is what's your mycorrhizal fungi component in that field. Do a PLFA test and find out your mycorrhizal fungi component. And the reason is, just think of it this way. You take a perennial seed, especially from a grass, there's no energy in there. You hardly have anything for a seed. It's imperative for successful stand establishment that newly germinated seedling forms that relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. So what we're recommending is you want to use species in your cover crop mix that will accelerate the population of mycorrhizal fungi in those fields. Now, often in your area, I don't know, there's a lot of woods around and everything. And yes, there are different species of fungi, but there's pretty good mycorrhizal fungi populations, which really benefit you because they'll come in from field edges, etc. But what I'm trying to tell you is cut down on the brassicas in the mix. You know, a lot of people, if they're looking for winter grazing mixes. They want them high in brassicas, you know, radish, turnips, etc. I wouldn't recommend that if you're going to transition that to perennials because those species are non-mycorrhizal. You know, they don't form that association. So that's the one thing that you're probably not hearing from a lot of people, but I would definitely take a look at that and
Yeah,
add some grasses to, in particular, or forbs to the mix and build those populations up. And we're actually to the point of people, you know, we've always said you need to prime those fields and get them biologically active prior to seeding to perennials. But it's that mycorrhizal fungi component we're really looking at there.
okay. The mix did have collards, turnips, radish, but
Hmm.
then they also added the rhizobac inoculant, elevated fungi inoculant, and along with there was I think 11 different seeds in the mix there. But
Yeah, and a little bit isn't going to kill you. Don't get me wrong.
yeah,
I'm not saying you got to worry about it. I would say test for it though. And on, you know, I'm not going to say that those mycorrhizal fungi biologics are not worth it, but I'll never forget what uh, Dr. Jones once told me. You know, Gabe, there's over 175,000 known species of mycorrhizal fungi. What do you suppose the two they put in that bag are the two that you need, right? So
yeah,
I'll never forget that as long as I live. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. You're welcome. Other questions? Joseph, do you have another one? Your hand's still up there. Uh,
No, forgot to take
okay.
it down. But Pasquale, did you have some? I know you were helping me out.
Yeah. Lauren?
Hi, Gabe from Florida. I didn't want to hijack the North Carolina thing unless you were dry for questions. So here I am, and I'm going to try to make it apply to North Carolina. Perennial, but you've already answered so much of what I wanted to ask. Perennials versus annuals, when you're still struggling to get that organic matter up, but you want grazing that's bringing us back to what we had thousands of years ago, right? And I know parts of North Carolina have a Bahia monoculture. In Florida, we have a Bahia monoculture. Even getting some cover crops annuals to grow to compete with the Bahia is a challenge. So I wondered for people who are on the journey, but a little bit earlier on the journey, do you recommend that we go ahead and dive in on some perennials? You know, and by the way, also, I'm so happy you mentioned the forest soil because we're about 100 acres, but we're about half forest. Oh my gosh. Can't believe planting a garden under the trees. I'm now more convinced than ever that we in Florida and probably North Carolina too, because we have so much woods, we need to be pushing into those trees. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
guess those two things, perennials, how soon, and also how important is it to try to use some of that rich forest soil? And
Yeah.
thanks for being here. And I'm so happy to get to bomb into North Carolina's coalition because they're helping us get going down here in Florida.
Well, that's what one of the things I love most about regenerative agriculture is everyone's willing to share. And I'm sure they don't mind you hopping on the call. So, to answer your question a bit, is, you know, too early for perennials? I would be more concerned about how are you going to get them established into that Bahia grass. You know, I'd be a bit more concerned because of the cost of perennials. Now, if you have a lot of bare soil that in between those grass plants, that may allow you the opportunity to get some established. you're probably going to have more luck establishing some forbs in there, some broadleaves, in other words, as compared to other grasses. The other grasses will come over time, primarily due to the management. And I'm one that, I don't like to spend a lot of money on seed, and the latent seed bank should be there. You should be able to stimulate it and it come. Now, I have seen places though where, man, you guys, you've been farming those soils a lot longer than we have here in North Dakota, and it seems like you've used a lot of it up. So if you want to add some, I'm certainly not opposed to that either. But I would be a little bit cautious early on of spending the money that perennial seeds cost to go put them in there. I'd rather see you take it a bit slow. Um, that's where I really like to bale graze using some bales that have some seed in them, for some that was harvested and cut and hayed while the plant was mature and there's still some seed in there. That's a really good way to get some new seed established. Um,
Thank you. And we are
yeah.
doing that. And we did have some coastal. And when the cows got to that little spot, they ate it all down. I don't know how much seed is left out of that
Yeah.
coastal hay or manure that had it in it. But anyway,
Well,
thank you.
did you give it some time before you first let them in there? Did it get some
No, we
growth
should
on
have
it?
given them more time, I think.
No.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
you'll
bale
find
grazing
out.
is
You'll
helping.
find
And
out in a hurry.
we are
Yeah.
seeing an improvement. It's just slow, but it's Florida. So, hey, it's going to be
Yeah.
slow. Thank you.
Well, it's that way everywhere. Yeah. Nick, is it? I'm trying to adjust my
Yes, sir.
triples here. Okay.
Hey there.
Hello.
Hey, so I just got through Dr. Elaine Ingham's program, if you're familiar with the
No,
Soil
very
Food
much.
Web School. And I've been making some great, biologically dense compost and worm castings for a few years now. Been working with a regenerative hemp farm in Louisville, North Carolina, but I'm trying to branch out, maybe into grazing a little bit, maybe into some market gardens in the area. I was wondering what your thoughts were on biological applications as far as liquids go. So compost extract or compost tea. Of course, you can always put out a solid, put a compost in a manure spray or something like that. But it's hard. It's hard to get good feedback on what application rates should be, other than just monitoring response and
hmm
changing from there.
If you want to jumpstart a system, boy, that'll certainly help jumpstart. I have seen very good results with using some of that as a seed inoculum, putting it right on the seed. And I've seen that both in garden situations. I've seen it in large row crop situations where they're using it as a seed inoculant. And boy, you can definitely tell it does jumpstart the system. Now, the important thing though is you're jumpstarting, you're adding that biology. You better be following the principles to have the home and habitat for that biology so it
Right.
proliferates once you add it. Because if you don't, all you've done is added another input that you're going to have to add every year. And we don't want that. So I think there's a real opportunity to use that appropriately in the right places.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're getting past 8 here to 8:15, and I don't want to get Gabe in trouble and make him late for supper tonight.
No.
So if there's any final
If you
questions.
know Gabe, I can afford to miss a few suppers, so it's okay.
Yeah,
No comment there, Adam. I saw that smirk.
you've probably spent a good part of your life in trouble like that anyway, so that's all right.
Yeah.
Nikki did in the chat say there's background noise from kids talking at their house, but sorry, Nikki, I don't know if it's he or she, but Nikki would like to ask someone to ask Gabe, do you believe that Nikki can pay for $10,000 per acre ground with regenerative ag? Very broad question.
Well, my neighbor's land just sold for 17,500 an acre. Now, in saying that, Gabe was not contending bidder, no. But yes, you can, but it's gonna take if she wants to do it selling into the commodity markets, no. That would be a bit difficult. Okay. It's going to take some specialty production and you're really going to have to be a good marketer, but you could certainly do it. Yeah. Yeah. It's going to take a bit more, how should I say this, intense production. You're going to have to stack some enterprises and things, but I believe it could be done. Yeah. Happy to have a conversation with her if she'd like.
Gabe, this is Chester Louder. I've got a quick question on nutrient density. Should that translate into higher test weights for grains? And the reason I ask, we sell some grains. We also do cattle, and we're fixing to do some forestry. We've thinned some trees and going to put grass in those. But my question mainly is on nutrient density, and should it translate into higher test weights or not for grains?
It often will. More often than not, it will. But I would not want to just say that, oh, because your test weights are a little lower, you don't have highly nutrient dense food. No, it can still be higher in nutrient density and below average for test weight. But much more often than not, we see higher test weights as you advance soil health and increase nutrient density.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, Ben?
If no one's got a final question, we'll wrap it up tonight. Gabe, we really appreciate you joining tonight, but more than that, we appreciate everything you are doing and everything you have done. Like I said at the beginning, I think most people on this call have learned something from you at some point, or you were the original reason they figured out about regenerative ag or soil health. So just can't state enough how much everybody appreciates what you're doing and what you have done and how much you've helped everyone.
I certainly appreciate that, Ben, and it's really good to see everyone again. And I hope you have a very productive and bountiful year. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Gabe.
Good evening.
Thanks everyone for joining.